right, so welcome to the deep dive, where we take these complex topics and try to boil them down to what you really need to know.
Yeah, cut through the noise.
Exactly. And for this one, we're going deep on Elon Musk and his recent sit-down with Ted Cruz on his podcast Verdict with Ted Cruz.
This is part one, right?
Right, this is part one. And
Looking forward to part two.
we're going to be, we've gone through that whole transcript and picked out some of the most interesting parts just to give everybody a sense of kind of where his head is at, how he's thinking about things like, the government, technology, where society's going.
Yeah, I mean, these are big themes.
Huge, yeah.
I think with somebody like Musk, who's involved in so many really, forward-looking, cutting-edge industries.
Absolutely.
His take on these things, I think, is particularly valuable.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that really jumps out is his look at government. His assessment of how efficient things are. And it seems like he's had quite an awakening, going into it maybe expecting a certain level of inefficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like it's been a bit more of a eye-opening experience than he even anticipated.
Well, I think it's funny. He uses this analogy of government spending, like shooting in any direction in a room full of targets.
Right.
And figure you're bound to hit something.
Right, you're bound to hit something eventually.
But that's not really a very strategic.
Yeah, it's not very precise.
No, and
I think we've all seen this in the sense, even on smaller levels, like, just in businesses or any kind of large organization. The bigger you get, the harder it is to really direct all of your spending effectively and make sure that it's going to do to the places that are most needed.
Yeah, to the things that are going to really move the needle.
Absolutely. So so he gets into a couple of specific examples that I think are pretty interesting. There's $2 million for sex change surgeries in Guatemala, transgendered mice research,
Right.
Sesame Street in Iraq.
Sesame Street in Iraq.
These are all things that he brought up that they found.
Yeah.
But what I think is more interesting than even those specific examples is the underlying kind of systemic issues.
Right. I mean, those are kind of, those tend to grab the headlines, those kinds of things.
These are the flashy.
The kind of, oh, wow, look at that, but if you look at sort of the day-to-day expenditures,
Right.
The things that are not quite so flashy,
Yeah.
I think that's where the real money ultimately is wasted.
Yeah. It's the little things that add up to a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things that he pointed out was just the sheer volume of software licenses
Right.
and media subscriptions that are paid for across all these government departments. And what was really striking, they haven't found a single one that's an exception to this phenomena.
Oh, wow.
Where, you might have a department with, let's say, 15,000 employees.
Yeah.
But they're paying for 30,000 software licenses.
Yeah.
A lot of which are never used, gathering digital dust.
Yeah. It's just sitting there.
It's just sitting there. And, just thinking about it, even from a personal level, like how many times do we sign up for these free trials?
Yeah.
And then, it renews and you're paying for something for a year that you didn't even realize you're paying for.
Yeah.
And now multiply that times.
Times a huge organization. And it's got to be an absolute nightmare to keep track of all this stuff.
I know. It's a nightmare on a personal level, let alone
Right.
something like this.
Well, what's really surprising to me is that there doesn't seem to be even like a basic inventory of what, what they're paying for.
Right. Just even knowing what you have is a challenge in and of itself.
Yeah. And then you've got these government credit cards too. I guess there are twice as many cards as there are employees.
Yeah.
Each with a $10,000 limit.
Right.
And I don't think anybody has really been able to explain why that is.
And again, when you extrapolate that, that kind of thing across the entire U.S. government.
The numbers have got to be just absolutely mind-boggling.
Staggering, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, he estimates that this ratio of just waste to actual fraud is about 80% waste.
Wow. So most of it is just, it's not even that people are doing things that are illegal.
Yeah, it's just waste.
It's just absurd.
Yeah.
And then he also talks about these like gray areas, like payments that are coming from treasuries, but there's no payment code.
Oh, wow.
No explanation.
Wow.
Or things are still being paid for even after a contract is supposed to have run out.
It just doesn't sound right.
No, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, there has to be some kind of accountability.
Yeah, there should be some kind of paper trail.
Yeah.
And he gives a pretty striking, he talks about $1.9 billion that was given to Stacey Abrams, a fake NGO.
Oh, wow.
This was supposed to be for green appliances, environmentally friendly appliances.
But they delivered very few actual appliances.
Oh, really?
And so the implication is that a lot of this money just went to salaries and operational expenses.
Yeah.
And there was very little auditing afterwards.
Well, that's concerning. That's really concerning.
Yeah, and again, he emphasizes this is not an isolated incident. This is something he's seeing across a lot of different government agencies, a lot of different departments.
That's a real problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes you really question, like, okay, how meticulous are we really being
Yeah.
with taxpayer dollars?
I mean, you would assume that with government finances that there would be this very precise,
Extremely careful.
meticulous process for tracking all of this, and clearly
That doesn't seem to be the case.
that doesn't seem to be what's happening.
Right. And so that leads him to this kind of interesting concept of magic money computers.
Yeah, magic money computers.
It sounds like something out of science fiction.
It does, and
But he's basically saying, instead of having this one unified system, like one big finance system for the entire government,
right.
for the entire country, there are these separate computers, primarily in Treasury, but also in places like HHS and in state and DOD. I think he said that they identified 14 of these key systems that are basically able to issue payments. And so you've got these...
Out without any kind of oversight.
It doesn't seem like there's the kind of top-down oversight that you would think there would be.
Well, that's really surprising.
Yeah, so am I understanding this right? So it's like the government doesn't really have like one set of books.
It almost sounds like they don't.
Like it's almost like different agencies might be using completely different accounting software that doesn't talk to each other.
It's almost like, imagine like a big company where each department has their own spreadsheet that they're using.
Right.
That they don't all connect with each other. And I've worked at companies like that, and it is a nightmare to try to figure out
I bet.
what the overall picture is.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get a handle on what's actually going on.
Yeah.
So if this is happening in the government,
Right.
that means that the numbers that they're reporting, the budget figures might not actually reflect what's really going on.
Yeah.
I mean, if these systems aren't talking to each other, if they're not being reconciled, how do they even know?
How do they even know?
If their numbers are accurate.
Right. And he actually said he thinks that the numbers that they report could be off by as much as 5 to 10%.
That's huge. That's a huge amount of money we're talking about.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because he said kind of jokingly, but I think there's a real point here. He said, I just want the login for every computer.
Right.
And he's basically saying, look, if you really want to understand how the government works and how to reform it, don't look at the organizational charts.
Don't look at the people.
Don't look at the people, look at the computers.
Look at the computers.
Because that's where all the action is happening.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's the software that's really running things. I mean, even if you issue an executive order,
it's got to be executed through.
You've got to implement it through software.
Yeah.
So if you want to understand where the money is going, if you want to reconcile the accounts,
identify the waste.
Yeah, identify the waste, the potential fraud. You've got to be able to analyze the data.
You got to get into those systems.
You got to get into those systems.
But he uses this really kind of interesting analogy. He says it's like reprogramming the matrix.
Okay.
You've got to get into the code of the financial systems to really
to see what's really going on under the hood.
To see what's going on.
Yeah.
And he contrasts this with the private sector.
Yeah.
He says in a company like Tesla, every expenditure has a code and is very carefully tracked.
Right.
They know exactly where every penny is going.
And you'd think that the government would be even more careful.
You would think so, yeah.
Than a private company.
Yeah, and he said that, if a publicly traded company kept its books with the same level of ambiguity and lack of detail
that he's seeing in the government, people would go to jail.
Yeah, they'd be delisted from the stock exchange. People would go to prison.
Yeah.
And so this brings us to this initiative that he's launched, this project called Doge.
Doge, like the meme.
Yeah, it's named after the meme, but it's
okay.
They're tackling this whole issue of waste and fraud in the government head on.
So what are they doing?
So their goal is to basically find $1 trillion.
$1 trillion?
$1 trillion.
That's a lot of money.
Of wasted or fraudulently spent money.
Yeah.
And get that back.
Wow.
Their goal is to have a net savings in FY 2026.
Okay.
If they're allowed to keep going Unimpeded.
Unimpeded. So meaning what? Like the government's not trying to?
Yeah, if they don't get shut down or if they're allowed to really fully pursue this.
Right.
And one thing that's interesting is he's really emphasizing transparency with this.
Okay.
He says everything they're doing, big or small, is posted on a website.
What's the website?
It's doge.gov.
Doge.gov. Okay.
And they have an associated X handle.
Okay.
So you can really see.
So they're really putting it all out there.
They're putting it all out there.
Yeah.
What they're doing, what they're finding.
That's unusual. I mean, you don't usually see that level of transparency with government operations.
No.
I mean, at least in theory, that should create some accountability.
She should, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because this whole thing with Doge seems to have really changed his public image.
Oh, in what way?
Well, 5 years ago he was seen as kind of like a hero by the left,
Yeah.
like a real visionary.
Right.
But now he's facing a lot of criticism.
Yeah, he seems to have really alienated a lot of people on the left.
Yeah, and he attributes this directly to this Doge project.
Oh, how so?
He thinks it's because they're uncovering a lot of waste and potential fraud in NGOs that tend to be aligned with the left.
Okay.
And he also thinks that, one of the things that they might be disrupting is fraudulent entitlement payments.
So things like Social Security,
Social Security, Medicare, unemployment benefits, disability payments,
SBA loans.
all these different programs. And he thinks that there are a lot of people who are getting these payments
Who aren't eligible.
to receive them,
Okay.
including undocumented immigrants.
So he's saying that this is a significant problem.
Yes. And he actually put a number on it.
Okay.
He thinks it could be somewhere between $100 and $200 billion a year nationwide.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a significant chunk of change.
Yeah. And he even goes on to say that he thinks that the Democrats have been using this.
Using this, meaning like
Using this fraud
Okay.
as a way to gain votes and to maintain their power.
Oh, wow.
And he points to California as an example.
So like a one-party state.
Yeah, basically.
And so he's concerned about the long-term implications of this.
Yes, he's concerned about the possibility of the U.S. becoming a one-party socialist state.
Okay.
And he's worried that if that happens, it'll be very difficult to
change core.
Yeah, to change course.
They get back to.
And he says this hasn't been without personal cost. He's been getting death threats.
Oh, wow.
He thinks some of these are organized and funded by left-wing organizations and billionaires.
Oh, wow.
He specifically named Act Blue and Arabella
Okay.
as examples of groups that might be involved in funding this kind of thing.
That's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shows how
polarized things are.
Yeah.
And how high the stakes are.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about, the future.
Okay.
Because he had some pretty interesting things to say about
Yeah.
artificial intelligence and robotics.
Yeah. This is something he's very passionate about.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And he thinks that we're going to see some huge changes in the next 10 years.
So what does he think is going to happen?
He thinks AI is going to surpass human cognitive abilities
Oh, wow.
within the next 10 years.
That's pretty soon.
It is, yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty bold prediction.
Yeah, and he thinks there's going to be, potentially billions of humanoid robots.
Billions.
Billions.
That's a lot of robots.
Yeah, walking around, doing things, interacting with us.
So like the Jetsons, basically?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And he also sees this huge increase in autonomous vehicles.
Right. Self-driving cars.
Driving cars, yeah. He thinks that within 10 years, 90% of all miles driven will be autonomous.
Wow. 90%.
90%. And within 5 years, 50%.
Okay, so we're talking about a very rapid
Very rapid.
adoption of this technology.
Yeah.
That's going to change everything.
Just everything, yeah.
How we get around, how our cities are designed. I mean,
Our economy.
it's hard to even fathom the full implications.
Absolutely. And he thinks that this is going to have a really dramatic impact on the economy.
In what way?
He thinks that with all these robots, with all this automation,
Yeah.
goods and services are going to become almost free.
Really?
Yeah, because you've got all these robots that are able to produce things and provide services.
Right.
So that could lead to a much higher standard of living for a lot of people.
Potentially, yeah, but it also raises some really interesting questions.
Right. Like if you don't need to work,
Yeah, what do you do with your time?
what do you do with your life? What is the meaning of life?
Yeah, what is the meaning of life if you don't have to toil away.
If all your needs are met.
Yeah, if all your basic needs are met.
Yeah.
That's a really fascinating question.
Right. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility, and with great technology comes great risk.
It's true.
He estimated a 10 to 20% likelihood of a Skynet scenario in the next 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Like a real...
So a catastrophic runaway AI.
Yeah, apocalyptic.
Okay, so he's not ruling that out.
No, he's not ruling that out.
He thinks it's a real possibility.
Yeah, he's a little worried about it.
Okay. And he also talked about this, the race to win AI with China.
Yeah.
He kind of jokingly, but I think also kind of seriously said that he prefers American killer robots to Chinese killer robots.
Right, if it comes down to it.
Right.
Which I thought was kind of interesting. It shows...
I mean, that's pretty dark humor.
Yeah, dark humor, but it shows that he's thinking about this in terms of national security.
Yeah, I mean, it's a geopolitical issue as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So where does he think we stand in this race?
He thinks that right now the U.S. is probably going to win.
Okay.
But he says that the key is who controls AI chip fabrication.
Okay, so like the actual physical chips that are used to
run the AI?
Yeah, to run the AI.
Yeah, and he points out that Taiwan currently has almost 100% of the production of these advanced AI chips.
Oh, wow.
So that's a pretty big...
Yeah, it's a pretty big vulnerability.
Yeah.
If something were to happen to Taiwan.
So he's really emphasizing the need to have
domestic
production of these AI chips.
Okay.
And then, thinking about his legacy, he said that, if SpaceX leads to humans being on Mars in the next 100 to 1,000 years.
That's a long time.
Long time.
Yeah.
He said that would be his most significant contribution.
Wow. I mean, that really puts it all in perspective.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, to think about, humanity becoming a multi-planetary species.
Yeah.
That's a huge goal.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And then we had this kind of quick lightning round of some more personal insights.
Oh, like what?
So he mentioned that Larry Ellison is one of the smartest people he's ever met.
Okay.
Star Wars versus Star Trek, he's firmly on the side of Star Wars.
Okay.
He said it was the first movie he ever saw in the theater, so
it had a big impact?
Big impact, yeah. And his favorite Star Wars movie is Empire Strikes Back.
A classic.
Yeah. And then he had kind of an interesting take on Kirk versus Picard.
Okay.
He sees Kirk as more aligned with Republicans.
Okay.
And Picard is more aligned with Democrats.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and his favorite Star Trek movie is Wrath of Khan.
Another classic.
Another classic, yeah. Although he gave a shout out to Star Trek 4 as a sleeper.
Okay. The Voyage Home.
Yeah, The Voyage Home.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. And then on the age-old question of Han shot first.
Did he?
He believes he shot second.
He shot second.
Yeah, he said that the alien missed his shot.
Okay.
And then Han shot.
Interesting.
And he definitely wants to go to Mars himself.
Okay.
But with the caveat, not on impact.
Not on impact, yeah. I think we all...
Preferably a soft landing.
Yeah, preferably a soft landing.
This was kind of an interesting one. He suggested that some of the American astronauts that are currently on the International Space Station might be considered political prisoners.
Oh, wow.
Because of decisions that the White House has made regarding their return.
Based on their political affiliations?
Based on their political affiliations, yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty...
It's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, pretty bold statement.
Yeah, so that was our whirlwind tour of Elon Musk's brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in, but I think it's really valuable to get his perspective.
Absolutely. So just to kind of recap, we talked about his views on government inefficiency.
Right.
And the potential for huge savings.
Yeah, $1 trillion.
$1 trillion, yeah.
Through Doge.
Through Doge and transparency, using technology to track everything.
Yeah.
We talked about the shift in his public image and how that seems to be tied to this work he's doing. Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty amazing how much he's alienated the left.
Yeah.
Just by doing this work.
It's a real change. And then we talked about his vision for the future with AI and robotics.
Yeah, billions of robots.
Billions of robots.
Self-driving cars everywhere.
Self-driving cars.
Yeah.
A potential Skynet scenario.
Yeah. I mean, it's both exciting and terrifying.
It's both.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. But, I think it's really valuable to get his perspective.
Yeah, he's he's somebody who's really thinking about the big picture.
Yeah, he's not afraid to think big.
And he's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
No, not at all.
And I think that's really important, especially in these times.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final thought for you.
So thinking about this potential for trillions of dollars in savings.
Yeah.
And the fact that AI is developing so rapidly.
Right.
What do you think? How do you think this is going to change the relationship between government, technology, and our individual lives in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big question.
It's a big one.
I don't know that I have the answer.
Yeah, but
It's something we should all be thinking about.
absolutely. And I think maybe an even bigger question is, what are the ethical implications?
Right. I mean, if we're talking about AI that can potentially surpass human intelligence,
Right.
that raises all sorts of ethical considerations.
Yeah.
That we haven't really even begun to grapple with.
Yeah, so there's a lot to think
A
about.
lot to think about.
So we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for listening.